मुलाकात तो सबकी होगी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, मैं हूं तज़मीन जावेद और यह है खबर से तज़िये तक। कुछ इत्तलात आ रही हैं, पाकिस्तान तहरीक इंसाफ के लोग ये दावा कर रहे हैं कि शायद बानी पीटीआई इमरान खान साहब की जो मुलाकात है उनकी एक बहन हमशीरा नौरीन नियाजी से हो जाए, लेकिन अली खान साहबा फरमा रही हैं कि अब तक की इत्तला ये कि सबको मुलाकात होनी चाहिए। और आज इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट के अंदर उनकी कैद तन्हाई के मुबैना कैद तन्हाई के हवाले से जो समाअत हुई है उस पर भी आज बात करेंगे। प्रोग्राम के सेकंड सेगमेंट में कल जैसे मैंने आपको बताया था कि बानी पीटीआई के हवाले से इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट के अंदर जो अलकादिर ट्रस्ट केस की कन्विक्शन की जो उनकी सजा के खिलाफ जो केस चल रहा है उसके लिए जो डिफेंस है, जो बानी पीटीआई के वकील है उनकी बेगम बुशरा बीबी साहिबा के, उन्होंने 2 हफ्ते का मजीद टाइम मांगा है। साथ साथ कल की एक और खबर में आपको देता चलो कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ऑफ पाकिस्तान ने वो पिटिशन बानी पीटीआई की वापस कर दी और उनकी बेगम बुशरा बीबी की, जिसके अंदर उन्होंने इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट के उस ऑर्डर को चैलेंज किया था कि जिसमें उनकी सजाओं की मुअत्तली को रद्द कर दिया गया था, ये जो दरखास्त दी गई थी बेल पे। सुप्रीम कोर्ट का ये कहना है कि नैब के ऑर्डिनेंस, नैब की जो नैब का जो ऑर्डिनेंस है उसके तहत ये जो पिटिशन है ये वफाकी आईनी अदालत में जाएगी। अलबत्ता पाकिस्तान तहरीक इंसाफ की तरफ से यह कहा गया था कि क्योंकि ये एक ऑर्डर है, कोई हुक्म नहीं है, तो लिहाजा सुप्रीम कोर्ट आर्टिकल 184 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के तहत इसको सुन सकता। तो बहरहाल सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने वापस कर दिया वो पिटिशन। तो ये एक डेवलपमेंट है। सेकंड सेगमेंट में आऊंगा। दूसरा, आज हमारे साथ मौजूद होंगी एक सीनियर सहाफी हैं और सर्बिया से उनका ताल्लुक है, उनसे हम बात करेंगे इस हवाले से कि यूरोप कैसे ये सारी चीजें देख रहा है, अमेरिका ईरान के माबैन उनका ताल्लुक जैसे सर्बिया से, जैसे मैंने कहा आपसे, और हम उनसे पूछेंगे कि इस जंग बंदी जो कि बाय द वे अब तक की खबर यह है कि आज कतर के अंदर जो मुलाकात होनी थी अमेरिका ईरान के माबैन, इतला यह है कि डायरेक्ट मुलाकात नहीं हुई। अमरीकी वफ़द भी ईरान के अंदर कतर के अंदर मौजूद है और ईरानियन वफ़द भी जो है वो कतर में मौजूद है, लेकिन वो मुलाकात कर रहे हैं सालिस मीडिएटर्स से, यानी कतरी जो है, जो कि होस्ट हैं, जो कि मेजबान है, उनसे मुलाकात की जा रही है। तो इस वक्त MOU के बाद जो फाइनल अग्रीमेंट की बात की जा रही है जिसमें कुछ हद तक रुकावट आई हुई है, टेक्निकल लेवल टॉक्स आप जिसको आप कहते हैं, क्या वो कितनी कामयाब हो जाएंगी आगे जाके, इसके बारे में कुछ नहीं पता। बट वी नीड टू आस्क हाउ द यूरोपियन कंट्रीज are looking at this MOU. Are they hopeful that they will survive? Or if they are not hopeful, how can they bring their hopes again in realizing that the final agreement is in the process and it will materialize one day? This is a very pertinent question which we need to ask. By the way, the US president always tried to coerce the European nations, most of the European nations and countries, to come and support the United States of America in trying to open the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, there was one time that Donald Trump even apparently heard threats to the European countries for if they would not help, that they would also they should not also expect the United States of America's support in terms of their support in terms of war against Russia for Ukraine. So these are the points which we need to understand, especially 1/5 of the oil transports from the Strait of Hormuz, and there's a report that after the MOU was signed, that shipping vessels, the traffic, the maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz has increased to an exponential level. So obviously things are getting back to normalcy. So Europe and the European nation and the European Union would be looking for a peace and for a peace that would endure the time and that would be long lasting. But will it work? Are their hopes are realistic? So we would be asking senior journalist and political commentator joining us from Serbia. She recently appeared in a state television, Pakistan state television, giving her point of view. She's a political analyst even. Her name is Jelena Novakov. Thank you, Jelena, for giving us your time. Jelena, I would like to ask you from the European perspective, how do you see the MOU which is signed between the United States of America and Iran and Pakistan as a primary mediator? Is this going to work for a longer period, and how do the European countries, especially the United Kingdom, France, and most of the G7 countries are looking at this MOU?
Right. Well, whether the deal is going to take full effect after 60 days depends on several factors. Now, today they are having technical talks in Doha, though obviously they are not high-level talks. One of the things that is probably going to be a problem is Israel, irrespective of this agreement with Lebanon. Even though the Lebanese government has agreed, Hezbollah has obviously not. Another point of contention can be how much Iran can enrich uranium,
Yeah.
and of course the Strait of Hormuz. We have seen, or also we have heard reports that different Gulf states have held the talks on the Strait of Hormuz between themselves and also with Iran, and now the United States are getting involved as well. Although I'm not sure how truly legitimate these talks are, given that Jared Kushner, who has no government position, I mean, being the president's son-in-law is not a government position, and also he is somebody who is neck deep into this problem of conflict of interest. Now, the European countries have offered certain help. France wanted to join in cleaning the Strait of Hormuz, though that now seems unlikely. And again, France, alongside Italy, has offered to step in Lebanon after the UN mission leaves.
Okay, but Jelena, I
When
would
it
like
comes
to ask you a very important question. If you remember in 2015, most of the European nations supported the agreement between the United States of America and Iran for the reason because they believe that if the war, if there's a possibility of war between these two countries, it would affect the entire region. And as we saw in this latest recent conflict and war between Iran and the United States, the energy prices soared to an unprecedented level in Europe, and most of them were concerned about the inflation, about the rise in prices. So is there the economic interest that is affecting the European nations, or there's something that the European countries want from Iran and the United States of America, because the possibility of the war between these two countries would ultimately affect the lives of the European people?
Yes, I mean, and it has already impacted us, just like everyone else in the world. But one important thing to note is that the European Union has progressively lost its former power, right, and its former influence, especially after this worsening of relationships with Washington, right? Given these issues when it comes to Ukraine and how much the United States want to help, and also after that incident with Trump threatening to seize Greenland, right? So Europe, and especially these countries that you mentioned now, are kind of facing also some internal upheaval. They are dealing with Ukraine now basically on their own. So there have been pushes, again, with Macron and France to kind of try and to insert themselves into this deal, but it is, I think it says a lot that the European countries or any of the G7 countries just weren't involved in this mediation process. So I think that also signifies that Europe has lost significant influence, and that
you're saying that because they were not involved in the mediation process, they have lost their influence and the clout. What are the reasons for that? Because we need to understand from the Pakistani perspective. We remember the Great Britain and all these countries. They still have the clout and influence because they are in the G7 countries. But what is, are we getting into a more confined world where the power structure is confined in few hands, or there is a multipolarity which the Europe is now not exercising?
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, Europe is kind of in no man's land right now, because Europe has been relying on the United States and has followed the United States into several wars previously. Now that hasn't been the case, and Trump has commented on that and has expressed his disapproval. Again, Europe is in that place right now because of these previous incidents. Also, what is very important to note is that European NATO members have shown certain resistance to increasing the amount of defense budget, of not just resistance, but also incapacity, right? And that is especially prominent now, given that there is a war in Ukraine going on that has no end to it. I mean, we don't have an end in sight. So with those points of contention with Washington, Europe has kind of lost its footing. Even if you look at a multipolar world or bipolar world, Europe currently has no place in it. So I don't see in the future also large European influence on the outcome of this war in the Middle East.
Very interesting observation. Jelena, what would you say? There is always a perception that the European countries, most of the European countries, do not, for instance, we have discussed about the United States of America, but there's a perception in this part of the world most of the European nations try to align themselves with the Israeli interest. And we have seen in the recent past that there was so much arms sales for Israel. And yes, we also saw that there were some consensus that we should not be selling our weapons to Israel because its role in genocide in Gaza, in Lebanon. So is there a change in policy? Can we see a change in policy in the European countries for not supporting Israel in the coming future?
There is also a difference in opinion between different European countries, right? There are some really strong supporters of Israel, like Germany, right? And then there are countries like Spain and many other smaller countries,
Yes.
like Slovenia and during the Slovenian previous government, and also I mean, there are many countries,
Sure.
but also Ireland as well. But we will see this conflict between European nations on how much the individual nations want or can contribute. We are less likely to see one unifying agreement even within the European Union, even though European Union has recently had opportunities to cut the trade deal with Israel, but ultimately the consensus was that that was not going to happen. So maybe on the level of the European Union, nothing will change in that department, but we see several European countries kind of starting to turn away from Israel.
Joanna, will there be a collective response to the possibility of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, visiting Europe, and he would be facing the arrest? Is there any possibility in the future?
Depending where, right? European countries do have the obligation to arrest Netanyahu if he does show, right? Because he's been indicted on war crimes. Now, there have also been several countries that have openly stated that that is not going to happen. For example, Hungary under Viktor Orban, though the new prime minister, Peter Magyar, has said that if Netanyahu comes, he is going to go by law and arrest him and then ship him off to The Hague, right? So again, there is no unifying consensus within the European Union because you have to consider the fact that this is a union of 27 countries with 27 leaders and different foreign policies, especially now when it comes to Israel.
True. Okay, Janina, we can go back and recall I think 7 or 8 months ago, France and United Kingdom, one of the two members of the Security Council, because they possess the right to veto any resolution, they extended the support for the Palestine to have this state, I think, which was unprecedented and which was a watershed moment for the reason because there was a perception that these countries would never support Palestinian statehood, but we saw they did. So there may be a change, we are getting the impression that there is a change in policy or in the thinking in the European think tanks that we should be more towards, we should be trying to resolve the conflict through dialogue and peace, and that would only come if we accept the demands and the rights of the Palestinian people. But how long will this work? Because after this war between the United States of America and Iran, there's also a possibility, which, by the way, a few news outlets have reported, that the Americans are thinking to have their bases in Europe, and they want to shift their bases from the Middle Eastern countries, and more importantly, they want to shift towards the European nations. Will Europe host the American air bases in the near future, given that this poses a very dangerous risk for a potential conflict?
Well, first of all, any talks about and some countries have actually recognized the Palestinian state, but with others who have been pushing for it, that's all null and void, because if they're still shipping weapons to Israel and then on the other hand pushing for the Palestinian state, you can also look at that through the prism of internal pressures, right? Because literally every single country in Europe, whether it's the European Union or not, has had major pro-Palestinian protests that have been going on since 2023, basically. So it is in a way a response to internal pressure, and there is also this image of European land or European Union as this human rights protector, right? So I think that a lot of that is image-based. Now, whether American air bases are going to be hosted, that is probably also going to depend on the individual countries, because Brussels cannot decide in uniformity that everyone is going to host
I think this
American
is
air
going to
bases.
be this is going to be a sovereign decision of a country to host American air bases. I totally agree with you, but I would like to extend this discussion further. In the MOU, we saw that the Iranian crude oil can be sold, and I think this was a space given to the Iranian nation. Right or wrong, we can have a debate on that, but this was given to them. So, will would European countries as sovereign nations would benefit from this? One of the points in the 14 of the MOUs, would they benefit from buying the Iranian crude, and would they make decisions in their favor?
Right. Well, any procurement of Iranian oil can certainly help the European economy, as well as the economy of any individual nations, given that we have been going through a major inflation since 2022, when the war in Ukraine started. But also now we have seen gas prices rising and many nations burning through their strategic reserves. So yes, this can be beneficial to every European country, but how that is going to happen and what individual nations are going to determine it, it's perhaps early to speculate, and especially speculate on every possible outcome when it comes to individual countries.
I know it's early to speculate, but there's a possibility. Politics is out of every possibility, and we saw that something happened in this MOU. I would like to extend further this discussion, as we are from Pakistan, and we are very glad that you are giving us this important interview. How the European nations are looking at the role that Pakistan played in trying to mediate between the US and Iran, and especially Pakistan is trying to extend its footprint across the region, for the reason because Pakistan, you know, that it emerged as a victorious country when it apparently, obviously, I don't know what's your perspective on that, but we think and we believe we have certain proofs to prove this, that we defeated India in the last standoff with them, and then we saw that most of the countries were trying to align themselves with Pakistan in terms of having a defense agreement, defense pact, and we saw that Pakistan leaders, civil and military, they both played their part in trying to bridge the differences between the United States of America and Iran. I think we cannot say that they are 100% successful, but at least they've been able to strike a deal, not a deal or MOU between Iran and the US. How the European countries are watching at this?
Right. Well, obviously, the fact that European countries didn't take part in it is probably something that is viewed negatively with the European Union. But I also think that there is an understanding that Pakistan and certain other countries like Oman do have a special position in this situation, given that in Pakistan's case, the country has been a long-time U.S. ally, but is also a Muslim country, right? So it does give a different perspective to this deal and this memorandum that any European countries could have possibly offered. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, there are certain European countries, maybe not the European Union as a whole, but there are certain European countries that would like to be more involved and have pushed for more involvement, but nothing has come of it so far. We're probably going to see more involvement of different European countries when it comes to Lebanon than when it comes to
Janina, one more last question to you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Can you tell me, as you know, that Pakistan is one of the signatories of European Union GSP Plus status, and we are one of the signatories, and Pakistan's exports are massive to the European countries. I think our textile exports are because one of the source of remittance or income is one of the source of earning the inflows is from the Europe. But we saw that sometimes the European countries or your European Union try to express things about the rights issue in Pakistan, which may not be exactly the reflection of what we are doing in Pakistan. And Pakistan has some concerns over the fact that most of these narratives are built on speculations or some type of certain lobbies which are trying to portray Pakistan in a negative image. How can we reconcile these two things in together in peace, and the European nations can understand the Pakistani perspective, and Pakistan can also play its part in dispelling this impression that Pakistan is not fulfilling its obligation when it comes to the rights issue, because Pakistan, like you can also see the records that Pakistan has achieved so much things on diplomatic level, but obviously there are certain trust issues when it comes to the right issues. How can we help in reconciling these differences?
I'm not sure that you have to, right? I mean, if you look at what's happening in the European Union right now, they don't recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan officially, but are negotiating with them to give, as they say, dignified return of the Afghan refugees. So the matter of appearance, you know, those appearances and how it looks optically doesn't particularly matter when it comes to the trade. And yes, Europe might continue to insist on certain human rights improvements, safety concerns of minority groups, etc. And that's definitely something that should be addressed by Pakistan. But again, that is a Pakistani internal issue. It's not something that the European Union has to observe or has to correct in order to trade with Pakistan.
But we saw, Jelena, there were some debates in the UK Parliament on the Pakistan internal issue in the recent past.
Right, as I said before, that is not necessarily Europe's business, right? Given that their own hypocrisy, also collaborations with countries such as Saudi Arabia, where we have massive human rights violations, right? So there might be some notices given by the European Parliament, but again, any potential human rights violations are should be referred to the United Nations. That is not Europe's job to correct.
Thank you, Jelena Novakov, for giving us your time, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Viewers, we presented this first segment on the issue, which relates at how the European nations see this conflict between Iran and the US, and are they hopeful enough that this MOU will lead towards a final agreement. And we discussed so many things about the European standing perspective, how they see this war, and especially the role Pakistan played as a mediator between Iran and the US. Like I said in my introduction, that the talks which were going to be held in Qatar are stopped for now, because the Iranian delegation insists that it will only talk to the Qatari counterparts, who are the primary mediators, and the US also would be talking to the Qatari mediators. So technical level talks are still in the process, but it's being done through different but it is being done through the mediators. So there are no level at the moment. There are no direct level technical talks. We would see that how the things would unfold in the coming days, and I'm hopeful the ऊपर नीचे मामला चलता रहेगा, but still there would be a solution. इस नुक्ते पर break लेते हैं. We will take the break, and after the break we would be discussing the Pakistan's current political issue.